अस्पताल के सभी स्थानों पर जैसे फार्मा सेंटर, टेस्ट लैब, रिसेप्शन, लिफ्ट और वेटिंग एरिया में सोशल डिस्टेंसिंग का कड़ाई से पालन किया जा रहा है। इटर्नल हॉस्पिटल के हाउसकीपिंग स्टाफ द्वारा लगातार 1% सोडियम हाइपोक्लोराइट केमिकल इस्तेमाल कर बिलिंग काउंटर, ओपीडी, कैफेटेरिया, लिफ्ट, कुर्सियां एवं फर्श की सफाई प्रत्येक 2 घंटे में की जा रही है और इसे कीटाणु मुक्त किया जा रहा है। अस्पताल के सभी विभागों में डॉक्टर्स, नर्सेज और अन्य सपोर्टिंग स्टाफ को मरीजों की देखभाल के लिए पर्सनल प्रोटेक्टिव इक्विपमेंट यानी पीपीई किट दिए गए हैं। अगर मरीज को खांसी, बुखार या जुकाम का टेस्ट कराना है तो उसके लिए अस्पताल यहां से प्रारंभिक जांच के उपरांत संभावित मरीजों को अस्पताल के आइसोलेशन वार्ड में ले जाने के लिए अलग से लिफ्ट की व्यवस्था की गई है। इटर्नल हॉस्पिटल में हमारी ओपीडी सेवाएं फिर से शुरू हो गई हैं, जहां हॉस्पिटल का प्रत्येक कर्मचारी कोरोना वायरस के संक्रमण के खिलाफ पूरी तरह सतर्कता एवं सजगता बरतते हुए सुरक्षित माहौल दिलाने में प्रयासरत है, जो वायरस संक्रमण के खिलाफ इटर्नल हॉस्पिटल के सुरक्षा कवच की मजबूती को साबित करता है। हमने WHO और केंद्र सरकार द्वारा जारी किए गए मानकों, मापदंडों और निर्देशों का कड़ाई से पालन करते हुए आपके लिए यथासंभव सुरक्षित परिसर बनाया है। अस्पताल के सभी प्रवेश द्वार पर सैनिटाइजर, व्यक्ति एवं वाहनों के लिए और प्रत्येक व्यक्ति के लिए फुल स्क्रीनिंग की व्यवस्था की गई है। मास्क अस्पताल में आने वाले सभी के लिए आवश्यक रूप से अनिवार्य है। थर्मल स्क्रीनिंग के अलावा हम अस्पताल में आने वाले सभी लोगों की मेडिकल और ट्रैवल हिस्ट्री की भी जांच कर रहे हैं, जिससे वायरस के खिलाफ इस लड़ाई को अधिक से अधिक सुनिश्चित किया जा सके। मरीजों के लिए अलग से प्रवेश और निकासी की व्यवस्था की गई है और एक मरीज के साथ एक ही परिजन के प्रवेश की अनुमति दी गई है। अस्पताल के सभी स्थानों पर जैसे फार्मा सेंटर, टेस्ट लैब, रिसेप्शन, लिफ्ट और वेटिंग एरिया में सोशल डिस्टेंसिंग का कड़ाई से पालन किया जा रहा है। इटर्नल हॉस्पिटल के हाउसकीपिंग स्टाफ द्वारा लगातार 1% सोडियम हाइपोक्लोराइट केमिकल इस्तेमाल कर बिलिंग काउंटर, ओपीडी, कैफेटेरिया, लिफ्ट, कुर्सियां एवं फर्श की सफाई प्रत्येक 2 घंटे में की जा रही है और इसे कीटाणु मुक्त किया जा रहा है। अस्पताल के सभी विभागों में डॉक्टर्स, नर्सेज और अन्य सपोर्टिंग स्टाफ को मरीजों की देखभाल के लिए पर्सनल प्रोटेक्टिव इक्विपमेंट यानी पीपीई किट दिए गए हैं। अगर मरीज को खांसी, बुखार या जुकाम का टेस्ट कराना है तो उसके लिए अस्पताल में अलग से फ्लू क्लिनिक की शुरुआत की गई है। यहां से प्रारंभिक जांच के उपरांत संभावित मरीजों को अस्पताल के आइसोलेशन वार्ड में ले जाने के लिए अलग से लिफ्ट की व्यवस्था की गई है। हम कोरोना महामारी की इस लड़ाई में जागरूकता को पहला कदम मानते हैं। इसके लिए मरीजों और उनके परिजनों के लिए जागरूकता से जुड़े सत्र भी आयोजित कर रहे हैं, जिससे उन्हें कोविड के बारे में अधिक से अधिक जानकारी मिले। इटर्नल हॉस्पिटल के चिकित्सकों द्वारा ओपीडी परामर्श हेतु टेली कंसल्टेशन या वीडियो कंसल्टेशन की सुविधा भी प्रारंभ की गई है। आपकी सुरक्षा के लिए हम वे सभी सुरक्षा उपाय अपना रहे हैं जो आवश्यक है, जिससे आपको वायरस से संक्रमण मुक्त माहौल मिले।
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nitesh Tiwari on the behalf of Eternal Hospital. I welcome all the esteemed doctors who have spared their precious time for this video conference. Hope you and your family members have safely sailed through this pandemic period. Now, before commemorate the proceeding, I would like to tell a little bit about Eternal Hospital. As you know, Eternal Hospital is a multi-super specialty 250 bedded only JCI accredited hospital in Rajasthan. JCI stands for the Joint Commission International, and it is the highest international benchmark available worldwide in healthcare. In this COVID-19 pandemic, keeping in mind that the important care for medical management, surgeries, and preventive care should not be put off any longer. We at Eternal Hospital is taking number of extraordinary steps to ensure the safety of patients, doctors, and all staff members. Our infection control measures provide a safe environment for clinical care, eternal care, safe care. On the inauguration of MEDEX 2020, Thriving for Better Healthcare for All, I would like to welcome all chief guests, Dr. M.N. Thareja sir, President IMA Rajasthan, Dr. Sudhir Bhandari sir, Principal and Controller SMS Medical College Jaipur, Dr. Mahesh Poddar sir, Vice President IMA Rajasthan, Dr. Rajiv Gupta sir, Chairman Medical Science, General Medicine and Research, Eternal Hospital. Dr. Rajiv Gupta is a researcher, preventive cardiologist, rehabilitation specialist and consultant physician, and has an experience of more than 45 years, and he is pioneer in coronary heart disease, hypertension epidemiology in India. Established the first cardiovascular epidemiology research laboratory in non-governmental sector in country. So first I will request Dr. Rajiv Gupta sir for his welcome speech. Over to Dr. Rajiv Gupta sir. Audio is not coming. If someone can fix.
So good afternoon, everyone.
Yes, sir. We can listen.
The first epidemic that we are all facing is the COVID epidemic. We are all seeing patients with this particular disease. Some of them are serious, some of them are not serious. The second epidemic is misinformation epidemic. That means there are lots of therapies. We all realize that lots of new universities have come up and they are giving all kinds of advice to our patients. And number three is the webinar epidemic. So today we have joined the webinar epidemic and we are trying to do something new compared to the usual webinars that they are organized in various parts of the country. Now this is a totally academic webinar. We are not sponsored by any agency, just a hospital consultants trying to reach out to everyone in the state, trying to give them what is new in various specialties, what can be done, what cannot be done. And I think it's important in this era because the virus is going to stay with us for a long, long time. And we have to learn how to live with the virus and how to continue not only our education, but also to continue clinical excellence. So clinical excellence is the mantra of this particular webinar. And I'm sure all of you who have joined this exciting session today and over the next few days. We'll gain a lot of new insights, a lot of new treatments, a lot of new ways to manage our own patients. So I think I congratulate the organizers who have taken a great deal of effort into all this. I congratulate the Indian Medical Association who have kindly helped us to run this show. Thank you very much and welcome all of you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your nice words. Now I will request Dr. M.N. Thareja, sir, for his welcome speech. Dr. Thareja is a President IMA. He is a family physician participating in the field of diabetes, hypertension, thyroid disorder, and he has attended various national and international conferences across globe. He served in the capacity of secretaries, president of various medical associations. At present, he is president of Indian Medical Association, Rajasthan. Over to Dr. M.N. Thareja, sir.
Nice words spoken by Mr. Natish. I welcome Dr. Rajiv Gupta ji, Dr. Sudhir Bhandari ji, and Dr. Mahesh Poddar ji, Vice President, IMA Rajasthan. IMA is the biggest NGO in the India. It has got roughly 3,18,000 members all over India. It has got 1,93,000 members as a single member and 62,000 are the couple member. It has got 32,021 branches all over the India. It has got 71 branches in Rajasthan. This year, the IMA headquarters is much more concerned with the small and the middle class hospital. The IMA Rajasthan has got a web. I request all the doctors to download the IMA web so that we can be very well connected. And I request my friends, those who are the IMA members should initiate the others member and the friends to become the IMA member. Whenever we have got a unity, we have got a strength. If we don't have got a unity, we don't have got a strength. Roughly 45,000 doctors are there. Only the member is 11,000. We request to become more and more member. Now, I want to tell you in this COVID area, we have lost so many doctors and so many other people. As we know, we want to do the condolence for the few doctors. I should name them Dr. B.M. Sharma ji. He is the father of neurology in the Rajasthan. He was the first neurologist in Rajasthan whose work is unforgettable. And second is Dr. S.L. Tolani ji, who is the first doctor in the Rajasthan who have done the kidney transplant and done the lakhs of PUR and other urological procedures. And third is Dr. Pradeep Sharma as the ex-head of the department of the psychiatry, and he has done a lot of work in psychiatry in the Rajasthan. So I request all the audience to please keep silence for 1 minute in their condolence. Thanks.
Thank you very much, all of you. Now I will request Dr. Mahesh Poddar, sir, who is a senior physician practicing in the field of diabetes, hypertension, and thyroid disorder, done a lot of work for the welfare of medical fraternity, served in the capacity of secretaries and presidents of various medical associations. At present, he is Vice President of Indian Medical Association, Rajasthan. I will request Dr. Mahesh Poddar, sir, to start the proceedings. I will request host. I will request host to make co-host to Dr. Poddar. Dr. Poddar, now you can unmute yourself and you can say a few words. Yes, sir. Sir, your audio is not coming.
No.
Yes, sir, it is.
Dr. Ajit Bana is the chairman of Cardiac Sciences. The MBBS, he has done his MBBS with honors in surgery from LL Medical College, Meerut, MS General Surgery from SVP Hospital, Meerut. He did his MCH from Cardiothoracic and Vascular Surgery from GB Pant Hospital, New Delhi. Heart transplant surgery he has done from Chaim Shiva Medical Center, Israel. And he's done his training for the invasive surgery at Loin, France. Aortic surgery and endovascular repair of the aortic aneurysm from Australia. Dr. Ajit Bana is a renowned CTVS surgeon with experience of over 15,000 surgeries, including beating heart, CABG, valve surgery, minimally invasive cardiac surgery, congenital heart surgery and aneurysm surgery, heart failure treatment, LVAD, and transplant. Dr. Makkar is a senior interventional cardiologist with special interest and expertise in the field of clinical electrophysiology, pacemaker, and heart failure device management. He has done fellowship in complex arrhythmia ablation from Korea University Medical Center. He has performed thousands of coronary angioplasties, RF ablation, pacemaker, and heart failure devices. He is pioneer in his field in the state of Rajasthan by establishing first EP lab and pacemaker clinic in the state and implanting many devices, first in the state like CRT-D, MRI compatible pacemaker and ICDS. Rajasthan first leadless pacemaker implant goes to his credit. In addition to the academist, I will let you know Dr. Makkar is a good singer also. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your nice words, sir. Now I will request Dr. Bana sir and Dr. Makkar sir to start the proceedings.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all for this academic feast, which has been conducted by EHCC Hospital and Department of Cardiac Sciences. Let me tell you one thing about Department of Cardiac Sciences, which EHCC Hospital you all are seeing now, the galaxy of cardiologists and cardiac surgeons. You should feel proud that this is one of the finest cardiac sciences department, not only in Rajasthan, but in the country. You must have heard about it, that so many procedures being done in Delhi and Mumbai, but now this cardiac sciences department has done so many first in the country as well as in Asia. So today I'm sure that few small presentations or maybe some sharing of knowledge is going to give you an idea. You can surf through what the cardiac sciences department at EHCC Hospital is doing, what additional services we are providing, what complex treatment we are giving to the patients of not only from Rajasthan, from across the country or from outside the country also. Now I will request Dr. Makkar to start the proceedings of the academic session.
Thank you, sir. And as Dr. Bana said, that this is kind of unique department of cardiac sciences in India. And this is also like, our nation only, unity in diversity, because we all have our diverse branches. We are working in various fields. but we are working as one unit, and we are committed that anything which is possible on this motherland in India should be done at Eternal Hospital, and we have been doing this for last few years now. So I'll introduce our leaders of our department one by one, and they will present on their respective field. And as Dr. Bana told, they share their knowledge briefly. I know we are addressing the IMA members, so you are from very diverse fraternities. So we like to be very simple and straightforward, conveying our message, what kind of work is done. So I'll start with my colleague, Dr. Sanjeev Sharma, who is Director of Invasive Cardiology, Intervention Cardiology at EHCC. We started the cardiology department together back in September 2013. And he is a pioneer in the field of intervention cardiology in Jaipur. And he is performing all kinds of complex angioplasties, left main angioplasties, and bifurcations and whatnot. And the latest addition probably in the PCI and very much in news days is imaging. So I would like him to share a few slides and tell a few words about various modalities of imaging and other assisting procedures with the PCI. So over to Dr. Sanjeev.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. And thanks, Dr. Bana and Dr. Jitendra, for kind words of introduction. As said by Dr. Jitendra, am I audible now? The field of interventional cardiology has evolved at a very fast pace. And we have seen almost a decade back, after angiography, we used to eyeball the lesion, whether this lesion is 70 and above. And if it's 70 and above, we used to fix up the lesion. And in between, there's 50 to 70% lesion, we used to leave for the medical follow-up. And the same with the surgical side. If three-vessel disease, if having a borderline lesion, they used to put a graft, although whether it's significant or not. Now we have got a modality just to assess it very correctly, very precisely, what's the severity of lesion. That's possible with the use of functional assessment by fractional flow reserve, that is a pressure wire, and also by the imaging. Most of you are already aware that intravascular ultrasound we have been using for more than 10 years now. And in the last 5 to 7 years, that OCT, or optical coherence tomography, is also in the picture and gives a very clean and pristine view of vessel from inside. Like on the left side, like you can see the title, Taking Treatment of the CAD to the Next Level. And this is what we have been following in at our hospital, EHCC. On the one side is a functional assessment of lesion by doing an FFR. FFR is just a pressure wire, which we use to cross the lesion. And then we take the ratio of distal to the proximal, which gives us a clear functional assessment. And it helps in identifying whether this lesion needs a treatment or needs a medical follow-up only. And on the other side is the imaging, whether IVUS or OCT. And this gives a clear picture, whether a lesion is a fibrocalcific or is a fibrofatty or a thrombotic lesion, and what modality we have to use for the further intervention. And post-stent deployment, it gives an idea about the stent expansion, proper position, and that helps in minimizing the future complications and events. Next. This is a diagrammatic representation of how we do an FFR. To be very simple, this is a wire which is across the lesion. And this wire takes the ratio of the distal versus proximal pressures. Like PD is the beyond the lesion pressure, and the PA is the aortic pressure. And this ratio gives an idea. If it is more than 0.8, we leave on medical follow-up, because there are very less chances of having an ischemic event in the future. If it is 0.8 or less than 0.8, then it requires some treatment, whether in the form of stenting or the bypass surgery. Next. This is the very simple representation of how it helps. Like this, next, you can go next. Like in the LAD circumflex on RCA, there are 3 vessels, and the lesion looks borderline, like 50%, 50, 60%. Next. Like here it's a 60%. Next. Here also it's a borderline 60%. And this looks like 80 to 90%. And when we did the FFR, this is 0.87. That is physiologically not significant. And next, this is also 0.89, not significant. This is 0.88 also for the medical follow-up. And this is 0.50, which is well below the 0.8 cutoff value. So out of these 3 vessels, which angiographically we say is a 3-vessel disease, it comes out to be a single vessel disease and just 1 lesion which need to be tackled just by single stent. So it really helps in deciding the significance of lesion. So 3 vessel becomes 2 vessel, 2 vessel becomes single vessel, or sometimes it becomes non-critical CAD. So FFR is a very important modality and every cath lab should have it for functional assessment and for the future revascularization. Next. And now it's about the imaging. As you go across, the CT angio has a resolution of 600 micron. So it gives a broad overview about the vessel and if there is some lesion. This is just a broad overview. Next, go to the angiography. It gives a resolution of 200 microns. So you have a clear picture. The lesion looks like a borderline or no. And then comes to the imaging part. If you look at the IVUS gives an imaging from inside. It's a sound waves are used that gets reflected back to the transducer and the image is formed. So it gives an idea about whether there is a fibrocalcific plaque or heavily calcified plaque, or there is a thrombus, and accordingly you can manage. When you go to the last image, that is OCT, which says optical coherence tomography, it has got a special resolution of 10 microns. So very clear image from inside, and this is respective images. You can see the Mona Lisa from left to right. The right one is a very clean and clear from inside. It really makes a vessel lesion characteristic so that we can decide about what's the best for the patient. Next. This is the intraoscular ultrasound we have discussed. We use a sound wave. Next one. Sound waves, and by the transducer, we advance the catheter over the wire to the site of lesion, and then sound waves are transmitted to the lesion, reflect back to the transducer, then image is being formed. And this gives us an idea whether the lesion is a fibrofatty plaque or it's a fibrocalcific or the calcium mark is there, and how big is the calcium mark, whether it's a 90 degree or 180 or 260. Accordingly, we can decide which is the modality for this calcium ablation, whether we should use a rotablation for the superficial calcium, or if there is a deep calcium, we might have to use a shockwave balloon or high pressure balloon to break the lesion prior to putting up the stents for the better long-term outcome. This is the same imaging technique beyond IVUS. This is the OCT, optical coherence tomography. The important difference is it uses the light. It uses the infrared light, and this light by the source, it's being reflected back to the source and makes the image. And this is very clear. Like in this image, post-stenting, you can see the stent struts are very much visible, very well opposed to the vessel wall. So it gives a very good spatial resolution, and this very much helps us in the stent optimization and for the future prevention of the events. Next. Like in this picture in the OCT, you can see the length of lesion. There is a very tight lesion, and the lesion characteristics is very much clear by this. And accordingly, we can decide whether we need a simple balloon for periodization, or the scoring or cutting balloon for breaking and cracking the lesion, or high pressure balloon, or at times a rotablation to ablate the calcium prior to putting up the stent. This is a very simple video is showing the crossing with the wire, and then this is the OCT catheter, and it reflects the light. And in just 2 seconds, 1 or 2 seconds, it images whole of the vessel, 54 millimeter area, and new catheter image more than 70 millimeter area. And it is a very, next one. And on the basis of that, we can decide if the lesion is calcific. We can use a calcium ablation technique, like in this case. It's a very good animation about the rotablation. If the lesion is calcific, over the wire, you can advance this rotablation burr with a gentle packing movement, and over its outer surface, there is a diamond particles impregnated over it, and which ablates the calcium. So it revolutes at the speed of 170,000 revolutions per minute. And with a very gentle movement, we can ablate the calcium. And once calcium is gone, the stent optimization or stent deployment is very good. So the imaging helps in deciding and what's the lesion characteristic, whether it's a fibrocalcific or the calcified lesion, and then we can decide about the modality to prepare the bed prior to putting up the stent. And after putting up the stent, we do image to have an idea over the well-positioned, well-expanded stents. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjeev. You have told everyone about the imaging. What is the role of imaging in recent advancement in angioplasties, and how you can optimize the treating patients as well as giving a best treatment to the patient. So let's move forward. Now we have Dr. Ravinder. Dr. Ravinder is a intervention cardiologist, but he is a different kind of intervention cardiologist. Dr. Ravinder is a senior consultant of cardiology, as well as he's a director of structural heart disease and transcatheter therapies, which include the aortic valve replacement, mitral valve repair, etc. Dr. Ravinder is one of the dynamic cardiologists, which Rajasthan state is fortunate to have him here. And he has so many procedures done for the first time, not only in Rajasthan, but in the country. And some of them he has done, like double valve transcatheter replacement of mitral as well as the aortic valve replacement. One patient that was done for the first time in Asia by Dr. Ravinder. So he is definitely a pioneer in structural heart disease in India, as well as he is a cardiologist who has a very good knowledge of complex angioplasties, rota, etc., and all those things. So now I will request Dr. Ravinder to present his small talk or small slide.
Thank you very much, sir, for the kind words. And as it was pointed out earlier, it is our team, which gives us strength to do all these treatment complex cardiac patients. And it is not a one-person effort, but it's the effort of the entire team which makes us comfortable, and we make sure that our patient sails through the treatment and the hospital stay. I don't have any presentation, but I'll make a very small talk on 3 topics. One is transcatheter aortic valve replacement. Number 2 is transcatheter mitral valve therapies. And number 3 is an Impella-assisted PCI for patients who are in cardiogenic shock, and Impella-assisted treatment for patients who are in cardiogenic shock. So number 1, transcatheter aortic valve replacement. But before I start my topic, let me pay my homage to respected Professor Sudhir Bhandari sir, Dr. M.L. Thareja, and all the esteemed members of the IMA Rajasthan who have taken up some time and to attend this webinar. I can understand that it is very difficult nowadays to attend a webinar, but thank you all for attending this EHCC Cardiac Sciences webinar. So coming back to the topic, transcatheter aortic valve replacement. What does it mean? We can replace the aortic valve without open heart surgery by going from a femoral artery, which is the groin vessel. And this is being done under conscious sedation, and the new valve starts functioning immediately. What are the advantages of transcatheter aortic valve replacement? When done in a suitable patient, the patient's recovery is faster, the risk of complications are lesser compared to the open heart surgery, and it is a tissue valve. But whether a patient needs a TAVR or whether a patient is suitable candidate for a TAVR, it needs to be evaluated properly. And as I said, only in the right patient, this therapy is useful. Coming to the second point, which is transcatheter mitral valve replacement and repair. So mitral valve repair, as I did it for a patient who had a severe mitral regurgitation, 75-year-old, high risk for an open heart surgery. We go from the femoral vein, go to the right atrium, go to the left atrium, and put a clip in the leaking valve. And to my right is Dr. Hemant Chaturvedi, who is an expert in transesophageal echo, and he shows where to put the clip, and we can get rid of the mitral valve regurgitation without any open heart surgery. Mitral valve replacement, at present, we do not do transcatheter mitral valve replacement in patients who have native mitral valve disease. But if a patient has undergone a surgical mitral valve replacement in the past and it is a tissue valve, we can put a new valve inside that tissue valve, which has either degenerated and it is stenosed, or patient has developed mitral regurgitation. Again, the recovery is very fast, and it is a boon for patients who are intermediate to high risk for a second time open heart surgery. So all the valve procedures at present can be done without open heart surgery using a catheter-based technique in appropriate candidates. So we would evaluate a patient and we can tailor a therapy. Certain category of patients would do better for surgery, so they go for surgery. Certain category of patients would do better for a transcatheter valve procedure. For them, we would offer a transcatheter valve procedure. Coming to the third point, which is cardiogenic shock. at present, cardiologists and physicians all over the country are actually struggling with cardiogenic shock. So if you look at the mortality of cardiogenic shock, despite advances in the angioplasty, despite advances in the medical management, the mortality in cardiogenic shock still remains 60 to 70% despite best care. And the reason why this is happening is all these medicines, they are trying to augment from the heart, which is actually dying. It's like you are flogging a dead horse. So what is Impella? Impella is the smallest heart pump which can be inserted from the femoral artery without any open heart surgery. And it can give a cardiac output of 2.5 to 4.5 liters until patient either recovers or number two, he goes to Bana sir for a LVAD, or a patient goes to sir for a transplant. And number four is sometimes after putting the Impella, we can do a complex angioplasty if we feel that patient's myocardium might recover and patient's ejection fraction can recover. So without any wasting further time, to summarize, the summary is about transcatheter valve therapies, Impella, which is the smallest heart pump on which we can treat patients with cardiogenic shock, and complex lesions where patients cannot undergo angioplasty safely. So the heart pump Impella helps us so that these patients can recover from either cardiogenic shock or myocarditis and can be used as a destination to LVAD, destination to transplant, or destination to recovery. Thank you very much for the kind.
Wonderful. Ravinder, your addition is really wonderful thing which happened to the Eternal Hospital, the state, and this country. And I hope that you'll be continuing doing these kind of wonderful things and take the cardiac sciences of the nation to another level. So we have another very senior cardiologist, all of you know, and he doesn't need much introduction to you, Dr. Atul Kasliwal, who we have been working together since Escort Delhi days, and he's a very senior intervention cardiologist, associate director of our invasive cardiology, and he has long years of experience with all kinds of complex intervention. And today we have chosen him to speak about a very interesting subject, which is heart failure. And many of you are physicians, so you'd be interested to know about the newer therapies of heart failure. So particularly, we have requested him to talk about two drugs, which are the new instruments to treat the heart failure. So I'll hand over the mic to Dr. Atul Kasliwal to talk about newer therapies in heart failure.
Thank you, Jiten, for introducing me. Well, it's my pleasure to be in this video conference, and I respect all my colleagues who are present, and love to all my seniors and juniors. Well, the topic given to me is related to heart failure. As you all aware, the heart failure is basically, it's a very common entity which every physicians, they see a lot of cases, all through the day. And basically heart failure, when we talk about heart failure, it's basically, it's an end result of cardiac insults, whether it is a ischemic, whether it's a hypertension, diabetes, and a structural heart disease, valvular heart disease, or if there's no cause, it could be an idiopathic also. So there are a lot of insults, there are a lot of causes by which one can have a heart failure. When we are talking about heart failure, well, as you all know, that there's very simple terms. We call it systolic heart failure and diastolic heart failure. But nowadays, this terminology has little bit changed. We call the systolic heart failure we call heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. Okay, and the diastolic heart failure, we call it heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. Okay, but I will take I'll use the common terminology which all the physicians, general laymen can understand. A systolic heart failure basically means when the pumping function of your heart, it deteriorates. Normally we have got a term, we call that ejection fraction, by which, your pumping is assessed. Normally, the ejection fraction of a normal person is around 55 to 60%. When your ejection fraction goes below 40%, that means your heart pumping is reduced. Then we call you are having a systolic heart failure. It can be by any other means, okay? But if your heart function is around more than 50, okay, then though your heart is pumping fine, but during the diastole period, there's a lot of abnormalities in the heart. For example, in hypertension patients, or if you've got a left ventricular hypertrophy and some valvular lesions, then they can then they create a situation similarly where you have a lot of symptoms even when your heart pumping is fine. So that the problem is there in the diastolic period. So overall, when we are treating these heart failure patients, we have a number of drugs. I don't know, physicians are well known. We have got a number of drugs like beta blockers. Everybody tried carvedilol, bisoprolol, metoprolol. Okay. Then we have got to treat the heart failure. We have got ACE inhibitors, ARBs. ACE inhibitors like enalapril, what the first SALT trial was there, which showed that there's when you use these drugs, you can reduce the the all-cause mortality by 16%. Then there are other drugs like ramipril was there. Even ARBs was tried, candesartan was tried in the heart failure patients. Then nowadays a new set of drugs without diuretics. As you all know, we frequently use diuretics like furosemide, torsemide. But the new drugs like spironolactone, eplerenone, there was a trial by the RAILS trial by spironolactone, which showed that, well, when you use this drug above ACE or ARBs, there's a lot of, you can reduce the risk. Now, but even after using these beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, diuretics, still we find the heart failure patients, have a lot of morbidity and mortality. So there's now, two drugs which has there in the market, and really they've proven that you can decrease the morbidity and mortality when you use these drugs. So the first drug which I'd like to talk about is about ARNI. ARNI is basically angiotensin receptor neprilysin inhibitor. You must have heard the drugs. It comes in the names of Vimada, okay, Azmada. So basically, this drug has got a two-drug combination: valsartan and sacubitril. So what happens? Basically, when you've got a heart failure, your RAS, the renin-angiotensin system got activated, and a lot of things, when this is activated, a lot of things happens. And in the heart failure patients, we have got nephrotic peptides, which is released from the atria and ventricles. These nephrotic peptides, they cause vasodilatation. They are beneficial to the heart, beneficial to the patient in the way that they cause vasodilatation, natriuresis, diuresis, and inhibition of pathogenic mechanisms like they inhibit the growth and the fibrosis. So in try to keep, if we have got a more nephrotic peptides, so there's more vasodilatation and more natriuresis, diuresis will be there. So what happens? This sacubitril is basically an inhibitor of nephrolysin enzyme, which degrades these nephrotic peptides. Thereby, what cause? When you use these drugs, the level of nephrotic peptides increase in your body, and the beneficial effects can be seen. And with this drug, we have got valsartan drug is also associated with this combination. So valsartan, it inhibits the AT1 receptor, the functions of the AT1 when the angiotensin 2 combines to the angiotensin 1 receptor. It causes vasoconstriction and sodium water retention. But when you use valsartan, this is inhibited. So by two mechanisms, by using valsartan and by using sacubitril, the beneficial effects can be seen, and it has been proven that, and there was a trial recently published, a Paradigm HF trial, which has clearly proven that if you use this combination, the combination of valsartan and sacubitril over enalapril. So what happens? If you use this combination over enalapril, it has been proven that there is a 20% decrease in the worsening of the heart failure, worsening of the 20% decrease in the admission of the admission for the heart failure of your patients, and even 20% relative risk reduction in the mortality of these heart failure patients. So this drug has clearly proven that even if you use it, the patients are less likely to show symptomatic deterioration, and they are less likely to, to need intensification of the oral therapy while you keep these on drugs. Obviously, this drug has to be taken overall, all the above drugs. Patient has to be on beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, diuretics. These are basically additional drugs, and they have really proven that you can decrease the morbidity and mortality in the patients. Now, I will talk about the second drug, SGLT2 inhibitors. Basically, when we are talking about the SGLT2 inhibitors, we are talking about something diabetes. I think a lot of every physician is now knowing about the SGLT2 inhibitors. For diabetes, I want to stress, any diabetic patients, the chances of cardiovascular disease like coronary artery disease, heart failure, they're almost 2 to 3 times as compared to a normal person. So for a diabetic patients, this drug is quite beneficial in controlling your blood sugar. But it has been found that this SGLT2 inhibitors, there have been different cardiovascular outcome trials have been performed with this SGLT2 inhibitors. And we have got a different kind of drugs like canagliflozin, dapagliflozin, or we have got empagliflozin, these drugs. And for these, there are different trials, COVT trials have been done. And as a group, they have proven that when you use these drugs, they decreases the heart failure symptoms in the patients. And even for example, with the empagliflozin, it decreases the mortality. There's a relative risk reduction of 38% when you use these drugs. And recently, but what happens, when you use these drugs, the trend has been shown when you use these drugs, there is a decline, even after 1 or 2 months, there's a decline in the deterioration of the patient. For example, in the worsening of the heart failure symptoms. So, there was a query why the patients are improving. So it was found out that besides glucose, lowering, there are different mechanisms of these drugs, this SGLT2 inhibitors. For example, they increase the myocardial metabolism, they increase the ketone levels, which add the superfuel, and they help in the heart failure patients, and they decreases the preload and afterload. And it has been shown that when you use SGLT2 inhibitors, the central aortic pressure that decreases. And there are a lot of fiber, and little bit, they decrease the interstitial fluid accumulation, they decrease the fibrosis, they can decrease, there's a recent trial, EMPA trial, EMPA heart trial, which have shown that there's regression of left ventricular hypertrophy. So as a group, this SGLT2 inhibitors, they are quite beneficial in diabetic patients. But a very interesting observation has been observed. Recently, there's a trial known as DAPA-SF trial, which was published. And this trial, it included around 4,000 patients. And the patients, they had an NYHA class 2, 3, or 4. And they got ejection fraction less than 40%. So what happened in this trial? The patients overall above, patients were in heart failure. They have got an ejection fraction less than 40%. They are in heart failure class 2, 3, as I've told you. They were put on dapagliflozin 10 milligram, and they were compared with the placebo. And interestingly, the primary outcome was the worsening of heart failure. Heart failure means, worsening means there's a hospitalization for heart failure, or when you have got an urgent visit to the emergency resulting in IV therapy. So there's a composite endpoint of worsening heart failure and the cardiovascular death. And it is proven if you use dapagliflozin versus placebo, there's almost 37% reduction in the decrease in the heart failure outcomes. And all-cause mortality was reduced almost by the tune of 17%. So in conclusion, and the more important which I want to highlight, the primary outcome was same whether the patient is diabetic or non-diabetic. So that is a very, this trial has changed the scenario, how we treat the patients of heart failure. So nowadays, even if you have patients of heart failure, We are using the SGLT2 inhibitors, and it is clearly proven that it decreases, the worsening heart failure and the cardiovascular death. Okay, I will like to end my talk over here.
Thank you, Dr. Atul, for telling us the different kind of medical management for heart failure. And few of these drugs have definitely been proved as a wonder drug for heart failure patients. Now I will introduce Dr. Ashish. Dr. Ashish is a cardiac surgeon. He has been trained in Liverpool as well as in India. He is a senior consultant of cardiothoracic surgery in ESCC, as well as in charge and director of heart transplant and mechanical circulatory support. So I'll ask him, you have a mic? Yeah. I have asked him a few questions about cardiac surgery in this pandemic time. So first of all, Dr. Ashish, you please tell the people who are listening this webinar or this discussion that have you seen any changes in this difficult time of COVID time, or we call it the pandemic time? What different techniques you are using so that you are safe and patient is safe when patient is coming to HCC for cardiac surgery?
Thank you, sir, and thank you. I really thank IMA members for giving us this opportunity. And to answer this question, in the current scenario of COVID, we have definitely seen certain differences in the kind of disease that we are seeing. At the same time, the behavior of the patient and what changes that we have taken to counter this situation. I will just give a glimpse of it. So as we know that when the pandemic of COVID started, we were not very sure how the presentations would come. And we noticed in initial period that there were higher incidence of thromboembolic complications, which we have seen during the beginning period of COVID, pertaining to situations like STEMI, non-STEMI, or even vascular thromboembolic complications were seen at a higher number as compared to that of before. And the explanation for this was because COVID induces a kind of a pro-coagulant state and increases the incidence of thromboembolic complications. So we did see a rise in pattern of vascular embolic complications. The second thing we noticed was that people were really scared of COVID, and they didn't present with their symptoms. So they, with the fear of COVID, they didn't present. So that again increased the mortality associated with cardiovascular events. And now that awareness has come that getting scared of COVID has actually resulted more mortality with cardiovascular disease as compared to coming out and getting evaluated. Now more and more people are coming forward, and we are seeing now diseases. I mean, the spectrum of the disease as we used to see before. So it's a misnomer that COVID has decreased the incidence of coronary artery disease, which came up initially. Yes, pertaining to the spectrum of the disease and what precautions we are taking, we at Eternal Hospital are quite focused in providing the best possible care that we can give. In terms of coronary artery disease, we are seeing and we are trying to make use of as much as arterial conduits as we could give. With these arterial conduits, we assure that the quality of the grafts and the survival benefit that the patient will get are much better than the surgery if it is done with venous conduits. At the same time, we also try to introduce minimally invasive approaches for the procedures, so that will itself decrease the hospital stay. At the same time, it will make the patient avoid since it's a small incision, so we expect less problems in future course of time, and that by decreasing the frequent hospital visits of the patients. So use of minimally invasive techniques, use of arterial conduits, and as well as this, we are following strict isolation and social distancing protocols so that we avoid any spread of disease from hospital to patients and vice versa. So I think
Yeah,
this is
and
what.
have you seen any changes in the aortic surgery in recent past? Next slide.
Yeah, sir, this is a very interesting thing. When we were addressing a problem of ascending aorta, and everybody is now aware that when there is an aneurysm, usually these patients are patients who are having congenital connective tissue disorder. Most commonly, not always. Hypertension is another major cause, but in some form or other, there has been a kind of connective tissue disorder which causes the aortic structural dysfunction, and as a result, there is abnormal dilatation of the aorta. At the same time, this predisposes the patients for dissection, which can be very lethal. Understanding this, the earlier surgery plan for these patients was Bental, wherein we used to replace the ascending aorta, replace the valve, and implant the coronaries onto this new graft. But that would leave behind a significant amount of aorta behind. And at the same time, when it is in dissection, we could be able to tackle only ascending aortic dissections. However, those which are present in the arch and in the proximal DTA were not addressed. But now in EHC, we have gone forward in terms of treating these patients. Now we are doing a frozen elephant trunk procedure, wherein we are tackling the process of ascending, the disease process of ascending aorta, arch, as well as proximal DTA in one sitting. The advantage of this procedure is that there is hardly any aortic tissue left for the patients who are having connective tissue disorder, so that it enlarges in a further course, giving them a long-lasting surgical results. And the greatest advantage is if there is any problem in the lower aorta, like abdominal or the distal DTA, then we have a safe landing zone given by us from the proximal end. So we can tackle this problem by an endovascular procedure in future date, which won't be like a major thoracoabdominal surgeries as what was done in the past. So if we have a patient now who is having an ascending aortic aneurysm or dissection, we would any day prefer to do a frozen elephant trunk procedure for them that takes care of the entire pathology in one sitting. And at the same time, if there is any future aortic problem, we can tackle it by an endovascular procedure. So there's no, it reduces the mortality and morbidity very significantly in these patients. And we have had very good results with 2 of our patients, which we have done in the last 2 months. And these are the CT angiograms, which we can see of these patients. With a stent very nicely seen covering the DTA portion and the proximal part, which will further act as a landing zone in case if patient has any problem in the lower DTA or abdominal aortic and abdominal aorta.
The last thing is, what recently at EACC, being a person who is always involved in mechanical circulatory support, will you brief the people about this CentriMac?
Yes, of course. So as we have discussed already, medical management of heart failure. Now coming back to what as a surgeon we can offer to this patient. Now patients who are stable on medical management, it's good for them, but at some point of time they can decompensate being on medical management. So in this course, depending on what is their clinical situation, we will have to offer them mechanical circulatory supports. So like the basic support that we offer to these patients is IABP, that is intra-aortic balloon pulse pump. But the problem with this is a very minimal, and it supports the circulation. It doesn't do anything to the heart. So if the myocardial recovery doesn't happen, then putting IABP will really not benefit much. So the next level that we go is putting an ECMO. So when we put a patient on ECMO, it does support circulation as well as give rest to heart. But the problem here is the LV continues to distend. And that is a major problem with putting the patient on ECMO. If LV continues to distend, the basic purpose of putting patient on ECMO doesn't happen. So the next level of mechanical circulatory system are devices which are short-term circulatory support device like CentriMac. And this is an excellent device, like Dr. Ravinder has already spoken about Impella. It's a similar kind of device, but it gives a better cardiac output, like we can go up to 10 liters, and we can keep it for a longer duration of time. So this device is implanted in the heart, and the pump, as we see in the circuit, it has got an external control, and it has got an inflow, a pump, and an outflow cannulas. So we drain through the inflow cannula, the pump will pump the blood back into the circulation. And the biggest advantage of this over ECMO is that it empties the LV and gives sufficient time for LV, and an excellent device for and bridge to recovery of patients who come in acute decompensated heart failure. This was used in our patient who came with advanced heart failure, Intermex almost 2, who was decompensating with inotropes and having end organ dysfunction. We tried to put IABP, but he didn't show improvement. Next day, we put him on ECMO. Even with that, as I said before, his LV persisted to be dilated. It was not emptying enough. So we take him and had good results with Centrimac. So these facilities are now available to improve our armamentarium in managing patients with heart failure, along with already existing ventricular assist device and heart transplantation, which you have.
Thank you very much. I think Dr. Makkad will.
Thank you, sir.
Good to learn that we are ready for supporting the advanced heart failure stage 4 patients who are like inotrope dependent and cannot be shifted out of ICU. And these devices can be used as a bridge or so-called destination therapy. Now it's time to introduce another pillar of our department, Dr. Sanjeev Sidana, who is a senior intervention cardiologist, and he did his DM long back from Department of Cardiology at Jaipur, and he has been working for the city for now more than 10 years. And he has been involved in most kind of complex interventions here. So today we have requested him to speak about intervention of left main coronary artery, which has always been the domain of cardiac surgeon, but in certain selected patients where surgery is not feasible or appropriately left main stenting can be done, this procedure is being used more and more frequently. So I'll request Dr. Sidana to tell a few words about left main intervention.
Thank you, Dr. Makkad. I welcome all the members of IMA on behalf of Eternal Hospital. Today we will discuss few points regarding the intervention of left main artery. Traditionally, all the patients of left main disease, they were supposed to undergo this bypass surgery. But now in selected patients, we can offer them in PCI also. And how do we proceed in patients of left main disease? We will discuss in few slides. Next. So why left main is so important? Because left main is the left main supplies the 75% of the left ventricular myocardium in the left dominant, right dominant circulation, and 100% in the case of left dominant circulation. So severe left main disease will reduce flow to a large portion of myocardium. So these are the various trials in which the outcome of this left main disease in surgery versus PCI were discussed. And next, this is the result. You can see that combination of death, MI and CVA, they were equivalent in both the arms, that is surgery as well as PCI. And but you can see from this slide that repeat revascularization were more in PCI arm as compared to CABG. How do we proceed? We will assess the severity of the stenosis in the left main. If angiographically it is less than 30%, these all patients will be managed medically. And if angiographic stenosis is more than 70%, we will have to revascularize them. If there is intermediate stenosis of 30 to 70%, then we will need additional evaluation of these patients, either by FFR or IVAS. FFR, if it is less than 0.8, then these patients need to undergo surgery or PCI. And if FFR is more than 0.8, they can be managed medically. And if IVAS shows the left main area of more than 6 millimeters square, then these patients can be managed medically. And if it is less than 6 millimeters square, then these patients will require some form of revascularization in form of CABG or PCI. Next. So this is how we actually offer the treatment for patients who has got significant left main disease. It is a heart team approach. We discuss the patient, and what are the advantages of PCI is that it is less invasive, there is early recovery, and there is early safety advantage. What are the advantages of CABG? It has got long-term durability. It is there are less chances of repeat revascularization. There are less spontaneous MI. So we will take into consideration many of the clinical as well as anatomical factors to decide whether the patient will undergo CABG or patient will undergo the PCI. So if patient needs urgent revascularization, then definitely PCI is preferred. And if there is serious comorbidities and high risk surgery like chronic lung disease, advanced age, disability from prior stroke, or it is a redo bypass surgery, then definitely PCI is preferred. In patients who has got low ejection fraction, who has got long-term diabetes, who needs additional surgery also, and there's contraindication for DAPT, these patients will undergo bypass surgery. Various anatomical factors depending on the angiographic findings, we also take into consideration, like if there is isolated ostial or left main trunk disease, or if there is only additional 1 or 2 vessel disease, these patients we can perform this PCI. And if patient has got additional 3 vessel disease or additional complex anatomical factors like severe calcification, tortuosity, there is CTO or multiple diffuse long lesion, or patient will require a stent length of more than 30 millimeter in proximal LAD, then definitely CABG is better choice. This is a recent European guidelines who suggest that CABG is class 1 indication in all the patients of left main disease, significant left main disease. But in these guidelines, the PCI in which syntax score is less than 22, they have been given a class 1 indication. And in patients who has got syntax score of 22 to 32, these patients have been given recommendation of class 2A. Next. This is the case which was done. This patient, this was 60-year-old lady who came with acute chest pain, and there was ongoing angina, and there was severe resting depression in all the anterior leads, and patient was taken into cath lab. You can see the angiogram that there is a severe distal 95% lesion in distal left main, and that extends into both the ostium of circumflex and the LAD. Next. This is the epicranial view. Right coronary artery was normal, and treatment modalities were discussed among us and as well as with the patient. And because of ongoing chest pain, we need to treat the patient immediately. So this patient was planned for PCI, and both the branches, LAD and circumflex, they were wired. And the proximal ostial LAD that was dilated with 2.5 millimeter balloon, followed by dilatation of circumflex ostium with the 2.5 millimeter balloon. And then this circumflex ostium was stented, and you can see the stent is being implanted in the ostium circumflex. And this stent was further crushed with the balloon which was kept in left main to LAD. And then this next. Then the branches were wired again, and first kissing balloon dilatation was done. Next. So then a next stent was taken, which was deployed from left main to the LAD. And then this circumflex was again wired. And then port was done in the proximal part of the left main. And then final kissing balloon dilatation was done. And then port was done in the proximal part of the left main again. You can see the final result. There's minimal residual stenosis in the distal left main as well as ostial LAD. And this patient has now completed 1 year of follow-up, and patient is doing fine. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sidana. I think more and more patients of left main, the cardiologists are jumping onto the surgeon's field. But don't worry, we are not bothered about it. That's a great job, fantastic job. So now I request Dr. Prem. He's a young cardiologist among us. He's doing a fantastic new things to, again, this is a surgeon's domain, which we used to do embolectomy for the limb ischemia. If there is a clot in the lower limb or upper limb arteries, we need to remove them by a Fogarty catheter putting incision. So Dr. Prem is trying some new technique by which he can take out all the clots from the limb, and limb can be salvaged with no incision or no major surgical intervention. Dr. Prem.
Thank you, Vana sir, for some kind words for me. Slide, sir. So I am going to present about a case of acute limb ischemia. Acute limb ischemia, you can say it is similar to cardiac attack. You can say acute limb attack, in which the affected limb vessel was totally occluded, 100% occluded with a thrombus, And the only treatment of choice of the acute limb ischemia is the revascularization or establishment of the flow of the affected limb. So the most common cause of acute limb ischemia is the embolization from the heart. So in my case, last week I got a case who have, next slide, next, sir. Next. Yes. So who have acute limb ischemia of left lower limb. So for the treatment of acute ischemia, we'll have to identify which patient should be thrombolized, which patient should be mechanically need mechanical thrombectomy. So this is a Rutherford classification, and it will guide us that which patient should be taken at what time. So patient with a class 1 and class 2A in the class 2A patients, which class 1 is viably but not threatened, class 2 are marginally threatened. So when there is no sensory or motor involvement in the acute limb ischemia, they are classified as class 1 and class 2 class 2A. These patients can be managed with the intra-arterial thrombolysis. It means that these patients can tolerate 12 to 24 hours for intra-arterial thrombolysis. But whenever there is a mild to moderate motor involvement, these patients can't tolerate the intra-arterial thrombolysis. These patients immediately should be treated immediately, either way by the surgical embolectomy or by catheter-based embolectomy or by suction device. So conclusion for this Rutherford classification, from class 1 or 2 should be treated with the intra-arterial thrombolysis, and class 2B, who have motor involvement, should be treated immediately. Class 3 are those patients who have irreversible tissue loss or nerve damage, and the only treatment for class 3 is amputation of the limb. Next. Next, sir. Next. Yes. So this was the classical case of acute limb ischemia that I have told that this patient had mitral valve replacement at the 2015. You can see in the left side image the both leaflets of mitral valve moving, and this patient was a drug defaulter. His INR was not maintaining. So this patient on the right side of image, you can see that the popliteal artery was 100%, and there was a sluggish flow in the anterior tibial and posterior tibial arteries. Next. This is the Penumbra device we are using routinely, and this is a suction device. On the right side, you can see the catheter moving in the thrombus, and the left side, you can see the Penumbra device. We attach the catheter from the Penumbra device, and it sucks the catheters from, it sucks the thrombus from the artery. So we are mechanically removing that thrombus. Next. So after the thrombectomy, you can see the image of the flow is improved, and you can see the posterior tibial and anterior tibial. Posterior tibial is totally flowing, anterior tibial is flowing sluggish. So we have planned to stent this artery. Next. So you can see in the left side of the image, a stent of 7 into 100 mm live stent was deploying, and you can see the flow in the right side of image after stenting. This is the flow of the stenting, both the anterior tibial and the posterior tibial is flowing, and the patients up to the foot. And this is, and next. Thank you. So this, after deploying the stent, the flow was established, and after 3 days, patient was discharged with the, when going on his feet. And this was the treatment of the acute limb ischemia. So in conclusion, what is meant that those patients who have motor involvement should be treated mechanically or surgically immediately. Thank you.
Wonderful job done, Prem. And we all know that peripheral artery disease is increasing in India because of so much prevalence of diabetes. So it is important that this field should be developed in all departments of cardiology. Now it's turn of our next budding cardiologist, Dr. Prashant Dwivedi, who is going to pursue soon his fellowship in intervention from USA, and he's working with us for last 3 years, and he's also already trained in complex intervention. But a more important topic has been given to him, which is acute MI. And all we know is that sooner we do intervention, better is the outcome of every acute MI patients. The golden hour concept he would be giving stress on. So I'll hand over Dr. Prashant for acute MI.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words. First of all, I would like to thank all the IMA members for joining all of us on this webinar. And I chose the topic of acute myocardial infarction with the importance of golden hours. I chose this topic. The reason behind is most of the medical personnel usually encounter with the patients of acute MI in day-to-day practice. That's why I chose this topic to highlight the importance of timely intervention in acute MI. So we all know the spectrum of acute MI. It is from unstable angina to non-STEMI to ST elevation MI. But the STEMI is the most deadliest one, and it is the largest contributor of death and disability in India. And the India is the highest burden of the acute coronary syndrome patients in all over the world. And the very important point for all of us is those patients in India who suffers from ACS are younger, and as well as they are having a higher rate of STEMI than the patient in the developed world. So what treatment is available for these patients of STEMI? We do have fibrinolysis. We can go for a primary PCI as well as we can go for pharmacoinvasive. What is pharmacoinvasive? Pharmacoinvasive means patient is thrombolized and immediately patient is transferred to cath lab. So early deperfusion minimize the muscle damage, preserve function, and prevent the disability and death. Next. So what is the golden hour concept? So more than 50% of mortality in acute STEMI occurs within 1 hour of onset of symptoms. This is the golden hour. So in STEMI, the time is muscle. So early we resume the flow, we will preserve the more and more muscles and we will decrease the mortality. So this golden hour is the best opportunity to salvage the myocardium by reperfusion. Most patients don't even reach to the hospital within this hour. And reperfusion within 90 minutes is the optimal save life in the patient of STEMI. Next. So this is a very important slide which highlight that a benefit of reperfusion therapy in a timely manner will reduce the mortality in a significant manner. So if we go for a reperfusion within first 2 to 3 hours, the onset of symptom of acute MI, the mortality is significantly reduced. And studies has shown the superiority of primary PCI both in terms of efficacy and mortality compared to fibrinolysis or the pharmacoinvasive therapy. This is another slide which shows the time importance. So every 30 minutes delay in the progression of fibrinolysis, there will be significant increase in the mortality rate. Same thing occurs with the primary PCI. So if we increase the time of primary PCI from 30 minutes to 240 minutes, there is a significant increase in the mortality rate from 3% to 10%. So time is very important in the patients of acute MI. Next. So what problem need to be addressed? So there are two major issues. One is optimal treatment strategy to be decided, and another is reducing the time delay. In India, basically the problem is the infrastructure in India. So currently the infrastructure in India doesn't allow us to all the patients presenting with STEMI to be admitted in cath lab within a period of 90 minutes of onset of chest pain. So what strategy we need to follow? So if a patient comes to you if patient comes within a 90-minute, patient can reach to the hospital capable hospital. Patient within 90 minutes, patient can reach to the PCI capable hospital, and primary PCI can be started, then refer the patient for primary PCI. But if patient cannot reach to PCI capable hospital within a 90-minute period, then start thrombolysis immediately, and post thrombolysis immediately refer the patient to PCI capable hospital. So that is a pharmacoinvasive therapy. This is our PCI data at Eternal Hospital, which clearly shows from 2014 to 2019, there is significant rise in the number of primary PCI from 49 to 233. So next. So now I'm going to show you the importance of timely intervention of primary PCI with a case which have been done 1 year back. So this was a 65-year male, diabetic, hypertension, progressive retrostellar severe chest pain for 5 hours with sweating and breathlessness. Within 10 minutes of arrival to ER, he developed cardiorespiratory arrest. CPR was started immediately and monitor shows VT. Immediately DC cardioversion was done. Patient was intubated, kept on ventilator, put on vasopressor support, and on high dose vasopressor, 3 different high dose vasopressor support. Patient was on Codron, Xylocard, magnesium sulfate, but patient VT storm was not responding to anything. So it was decided to take up the patient for primary PCI, and patient shifted to cath lab immediately with ongoing CPR and multiple DC shock during the transit. At cath lab table with ongoing CPR, only carotid pulsation was palpable. So no femoral pulsation was felt. So we took the access blindly. Next. The next. And this was the initial angiogram, which clearly shows a significant distal left main stenosis and TIMI 0 to 1 flow. And while the right side artery was totally normal. So we did the primary PCI with ongoing CPR, with ongoing VT-VF, with ongoing multiple DC cardioversion. Almost of around 40 to 50 DC cardioversion was given during the whole the procedure. And this is what we have achieved in the last, the next. So this is all the procedure was done during the CPR with recurrent DC shock. And this was the final result. We were able to achieve the flow. And next day, so in post procedure, the vitals becomes stabilized and the vasopressor dose becomes reduced. In 6 hours, vitals becomes further stabilized on IVP, and patient's blood pressure is stabilized, pulse is stabilized, vasopressor support is reduced, and saturation was around 100% with clear chest. And patient started urine output, and patient becomes conscious following command, and no further episode of VT-VF. And then patient discharged at 5 days on his own. So what we deal throughout. So it was a diabetic, hypertension, ACS, cardiac shock, severe LV dysfunction with low EF, sudden cardiac arrest, VT storm, multiple DC shock, invasive ventilator, IVP support, distal left main bifurcation treated with a timely manner with multiple DC current shock. And at 1 year follow-up, patient is totally asymptomatic with EF improved from 25% to 45% and able to go for exercise tolerance of 10.2 minutes on TMT. So this is all a team approach. So, acute MI, so in conclusion, I would like to say 2 things. Team approach is very important in every patient in cardiology. Second thing, timely intervention of acute MI to be emphasized. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Kush, definitely remarkable job done for this patient. Almost gone patient, and you made him live 1 more year, and ejection fraction is improving. It means patient is going to live for a long. Fantastic job. And definitely what you said, teamwork. And at this hospital, EHCC, the best thing is that cardiac sciences does not work as a different department. We work like a team, and that's why our results are best one of the best in the country. Now I will introduce you one of the young dynamic cardiologists, Dr. Kush Bhagat, who was with us for so many years. Then he went on to decide that what extra he wanted to do in cardiology. So he chose the same subject, maybe motivated by Dr. Makkad, same subject, the electrophysiology. The most complex branch of the cardiology, which I do not understand at all, is the electrophysiology, all these wires stuff. But he has been doing this. He has been trained in this from various parts of the world, and he's doing a fantastic job and saving lots of patients and giving them a very good life. Dr. Kush, please.
Thank you so much, sir, for such kind words. And a very warm welcome to all the IMA members. Before I start my topic, I would like to thank Makkad sir for being my mentor throughout my journey at Eternal Hospital. And whatever I am today is because of him only. So the topic is a bit different. It's newer frontiers of cardiac pacing, physiological pacing. So next slide.
Dr. Kush, your audio is not coming. If someone can fix it.
Start again. Hello. So the topic is physiological pacing. And we all know that in a dual chamber pacemaker, we implant 1 lead in the right atrium and the second lead is in the right ventricle. Can you please play the video? Yeah. So in right ventricle, we either place the lead in the apex, I mean the RV apex, or we place the lead in the right ventricular septal. But what is the problem? The problem is that when we pace the apex or the septum of the right ventricle, there's a high chance, it can be up to 60% actually, of development of pacemaker-induced cardiomyopathy. So we all know dilated cardiomyopathy, ischemic cardiomyopathy. So this is a terminology called as pacemaker-induced cardiomyopathy, in which again ejection fraction declines, patient develops breathlessness on exertion, and patient becomes symptomatic. So what is new is actually that instead of pacing the right ventricle, what we do is we place the RV lead in the bundle of his region or the left bundle branch region. So physiological pacing is pacing the his bundle or just distal to the his bundle, left bundle. So we all know AV node continues as the his bundle, and his bundle then further continues as right bundle, left bundle divides into anterior and the posterior fascicle. So what happens that if we pace the his bundle or the left bundle region, then normal cardiac electrical activation will be achieved. And with the help of this normal cardiac electrical activation, patient will not develop pacemaker-induced cardiomyopathy. So next slide. So this is one case which I did few days back. So the upper ECG, we can see a left bundle branch morphology with a QRS duration of approximately 160 milliseconds. So this is the ECG when we pace the right ventricular apex region. So the QRS becomes 160 milliseconds. Now, the second ECG, the below one, is when we do a physiological pacing. So in this case, can you just, So the second ECG, we can see the QRS is very narrow. Actually, the QRS duration is 80 milliseconds as compared to the previous ECG or the upper ECG where the QRS duration is 160 milliseconds. So the patient was a male patient, I think 50 years old male patient, and his ejection fraction was 40%. So when we did this physiological pacing, his ejection fraction actually improved to 55%. So this is the beauty of physiological pacing. So if we do physiological pacing, not only patient will not develop pacemaker-induced cardiomyopathy, but if patient has decreased ejection fraction, then by doing physiological pacing, ejection fraction may actually increase. So this is the latest technique, which is, we are doing at Eternal Hospital, and we are pioneers in this physiological pacing technique. So if I have time, I would like to say something about electrophysiology. So you all must have seen PSVT patients, sir, and we are routinely ablating PSVT, AVNRT, WPW syndromes. But what is latest in the field of electrophysiology is atrial fibrillation ablation. So whenever there is a patient of atrial fibrillation, paroxysmal atrial fibrillation patient with structurally normal heart, who is having recurrent episodes of atrial fibrillation despite medications, becomes a class 1 indication for atrial fibrillation ablation. So we have special techniques which is called as 3D mapping. So with the help of this technique, we can actually treat atrial fibrillation and restore normal sinus rhythm to these patients. So what will happen is the patient will not have any episodes of further atrial fibrillation, plus the toxic drugs which we are giving for prevention of atrial fibrillation. We all give amiodarone to these patients of atrial fibrillation. We all know that amiodarone is 100% toxic drug. So by doing ablation, the toxicity will also, we don't need to give any medicine to the patients after ablation. And probably maybe in follow-up, we don't even need to give anticoagulation to these patients. So atrial fibrillation is one thing which, a lot of people are now doing atrial fibrillation ablation. So electrophysiology is not just PSVT, AVNRT, AVRT, but it is beyond that. We are doing all sorts of atrial fibrillation, and we can even ablate ventricular tachycardia, atrial flutters, and other things also. Thank you, sir. I think Makka sir will like to add something.
Yeah. So actually for long years in my department, I was the sole electrophysiologist and also busy in a lot of interventions. So we couldn't develop the department much. But with the addition of Kush, and now we are trying to build up a team so that, as he said, we are trying to do more complex ablations, including atrial fibrillation, ischemic and non-ischemic VTs, all kinds of tachycardia, flutter. So as far as EP goes, I can say that ours is a now one-stop shop and you can, get away with anything. So just to conclude our today's discussion, I'll involve our non-invasive cardiologist, Dr. Hemant Chaturvedi, who has been a pillar for all kind of intervention cardiology work, even EP work, and before and during procedure and after procedure, also a big help to structural cardiac program. So Dr. Hemant is a well-known name in echocardiography now in the city and state. So Hemant, a very interesting question, and I am going to ask you is that for long, for LV contractility, the ejection fraction is the standard word which comes in mind for the contractility of left ventricle. But kindly enlighten us for any better parameters to measure the contractility of left ventricle other than ejection fraction in terms of echocardiography.
Yeah, sir. This is a very good question because we know that in the conventional echocardiography, we all are dependent on the ejection fraction. That heart it contracts, how much it contracts, and as you all know that the non-invasive cardiology as a backbone of the any procedure to initiate to how to diagnose the etiology and to making the strategy what to do, when to do, and how to do it. So in cases of, as Dr. Makkar sir is asking about the new parameters for discover about the LV functions. So ejection fraction is one of the things that is just a global function of the left ventricle, and the one of the newer parameter is about the myocardial strain. So what is the strain? Strain is a word that is the myocardial deformation. So when there is a left ventricular contraction is there, so the heart contracts in a three manner. First, in a longitudinal axis, so it elongates the muscle fibers. Second, in the short axis, it shortens the and thickens the myocardial fiber. And third one is the side-to-side contraction. So by these three movements, there are the three types of strains. One is the longitudinal strain, another one is the circumferential strain, and third one is the radial strain. So basically, what I want to just tell in a just important thing is one of the important parameters for the left ventricular function assessment is a longitudinal strain, global longitudinal strain. So this is more reliable method, more reproducible method. So one of the method when we say that after assessment as a bullseye assessment that left ventricular ejection fraction is a normal, it's look like normal, but there is something that is fishy, and we can say that LV is not pumping it well, but it looks like as a normal thing. So this is the things which is called as a subclinical LV dysfunction. Basically, for example, I can say that in case of patients for the chemotherapy patients, the cancer patients who take the chemotherapies, or patients like that of severe AR and aortic regurgitations. So in such patients, we have these patients as a baseline ejection fractions are the normal one, and after the chemotherapy sessions, when we see that heart is contracting look like normal, it visually looks like normal, and bullseye it seems to be normal. But when we go for the global longitudinal strain, it's a speckle tracking, it's a strain pattern, then we see that it's a normal values, it's around minus 19. So when it goes towards the positivity like that of minus 14, minus 15, then we can say that there is a subclinical LV dysfunction is started. So LV is going to lose its contractility early, and it is not detected by the ejection fraction and for a conventional echocardiography. So these are the something new parameters which we can very early detected that these drugs can be harmful to the patients, and strain pattern can elicit very easily in the echo labs. Nowadays, it is not a so cumbersome thing. It is very easily detected, and it can be done so fast. And in our machines also, this is the automated procedure also.
I think Dr. Hemant has given such an insight. Other than ejection fraction, LV and these strain patterns are also very important for those people who are on cancer therapy, like bleomycin and other things. Those are cardiotoxic cancer drugs. And
similarly,
initially, the people used to measure these only by ejection fraction or by seeing the ECG, QRS, heart rate. But now Dr. Hemant can help us. You can just put a word
Yeah.
onto this.
Yeah. One more thing I would like to share here, that there are some patients, we say that go through the PET scan and thallium for the viability assessment. So here one, again, this is the speckle tracking and the strain pattern. We can give the analysis about what is the stunned myocardium, what is the thinned out and the non-viable myocardium, because by the speckle tracking and the strain pattern, we can give the actual amount of the myocardium that is viable or non-viable, or it is we can say in the cases of the valvular heart disease like that of in the severe aortic regurgitations, because in the initial part pre-operatively in the severe AR patients, LV ejection fraction is looking normal because of the increased preload. But rather than when in post-operative phase, we say that the LV's function is dropping so very much that we cannot assess that what the patient will have the LV ejection fraction after the post-operative status. So in such patients, in the severe AR patients, in the severe aortic stenosis patient with the severe LV dysfunction, we can assess by the speckle tracking or the strain pattern that what will be the fate and what will be the prognosis for the patient, whether the surgery is beneficial for him or not.
Great, thank you very much. I think we all have covered from non-invasive cardiology to structural heart disease to primary PCI to recent advances in complex angioplasties, vascular treatment, cardiac surgery, and I believe there are few questions. Is there any question?
I will request Dr. Poddar, sir. I think you have.
Dr. Poddar, if you can narrate, if somebody has a few questions. And very nice to see you, Dr. Poddar and Dr. Thareja,
from Nagore.
COVID time.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Dr. K.K. Sharma from Nagore. He's asking whether the SGLT2 inhibitor ribociclib is equally effective like carnadapa empagliflozin in heart failure.
Okay, I'll answer this question. Well, you're asking whether remagliflozin is equivalent to other drugs like carnadapa and empagliflozin.
Yeah.
Well, you know, when these drugs were, the trials which were done on these drugs, they were basically, they were for COVT trials, cardiovascular outcome trials, you know. The trials were done just to prove whether they are non-inferior to the placebo. So we have got a number of trials. For example, with empagliflozin, with the EMPHA-RAGE outcome trial, with canaflozin, we have a CANVAS trial, and with DAPA, we have got another trial. All these COT trials have clearly proven that they are non-inferior to placebo, number one. Number two, they have proven that as a class effect for heart failure, all these are effective. And they have shown almost a reduction of 35% relative risk reduction of the worsening of heart failure in all as a class 1 effect in all these three groups. But out of these, there was a decreased mortality was only shown by empagliflozin, number one. Now coming to the remagliflozin, well, there is no single last trial have been published with remagliflozin. And as compared to if you are talking about heart failure, we've got trials like dapagliflozin. I have just narrated in my today's talk, DAPA-HF trial. This trial has proven whether patient is diabetic or non-diabetic, this drug is quite effective. Number two, and recently, just 5-10 days back, with empagliflozin, there's another trial was published. This trial was Emperor Reduced trial. Okay, so this was also published, and this has also shown that empagliflozin is also beneficial whether patient is diabetic or non-diabetic. So, from my knowledge, I know about 2 drugs that have clearly, they were a last trial, behind them, DAPA and EMPHA, which have really clearly proved that they are above all these drugs. Unless we have got a trial with the remagliflozin, I'm not certain whether it's equivalent to these DAPA or empagliflozin.
Thank you, Dr. Atul.
So now I will request Dr. Thareja sir, if sir you would like to ask something, sir.
Sir, basically, in my day-to-day practice, from last so many years of 40 years practice, I'm doing the sexual medicine practice from last more than 25 years. In my patient, I have seen the erectile dysfunction is the precursor of the heart disease. In 2010, I have read a paper in Bangalore regarding that the erectile dysfunction is the precursor of heart disease. Do you routinely take the history of the erectile dysfunction? I'm asking from the cardiologist of the team. We are seeing this thing. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. Sir, we know your specialty, and people in Alwar are very happy with your treatment. I know that. And yeah, you are right. We had a discussion in some CME also about this. You are absolutely right, because this is the spectrum of atherosclerosis, and impotence is also part of the spectrum of cardiovascular disease. So, and as your experience says that maybe this is the early manifestation of atherosclerosis, because the impotence comes in particularly in diabetic patients very early age, even in 30s, they complain about impotency. So I think you are right, and we should make it a habit to ask about this symptom when we are evaluating any patient for CVD. And whenever we declare a patient having symptoms of CVD, impotence should be part and parcel of that treatment. I agree with you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.
Now I will request host to give an option to all participants. If they can unmute themselves, we can take 2 to 3 questions, and after that I will request Dr. Bana sir to conclude our today's webinar. So host, if you can give option to all participants, they can unmute yourself. They can unmute themselves and then they can ask questions.
Questions to Dr. Kasliwal.
Yes, sir.
Any suggestion about Victoria trial
Related to, well,
related to heart failure? Versuget was used.
Pardon, sir?
Versuget was used. It also reduces the
Victoria trial. Well,
Yeah.
GLP-2 inhibitors, GLP.
No. It is basically
You're talking about liraglutide?
no. It
Which
is
drug?
Versuget.
Sir, I haven't come across.
It increases cyclic GMP.
For in patients?
Heart failure. For heart failure, reducing heart failure.
Okay. Well, I haven't come across this study.
Okay,
I
no
think
problem.
you can highlight it much better if you know it.
It gives about 10% reduction in the heart failure admission,
Okay.
recurrent heart failure. So it is upcoming. Likewise, there are other drugs are coming for improving the myocardial performance.
Okay. Though we know about our pulmonary thrombolism, Riosio gut, that drug is obviously
Yeah.
there. But about this drug, I
Okay,
don't.
thank you.
If sir, you have more questions, then you can ask. Anyone?
Good afternoon.
Yes, sir, please.
What is strength training prescription in heart failure patients?
Training?
Please
Yeah.
repeat your question.
Strength training prescription for heart failure patients. What should be the strength training prescription? I am Dr. Manish Pariyar, sports physician and physiologist from National Medical College, Jodhpur, Rajasthan.
So in heart failure patients, basically we allowed them for a rehabilitation purpose. So besides that, the pharmacotherapies and all that, rehabilitation part basically include the exercises, amount of the exercises they can do, and as per their ejection fraction and their ability and the strength building. Basically the rehabilitation purpose is the amount of the exercises they should do, and to make the movements of their day-to-day activity of daily livings. As far as concerned for rehabilitation purposes, some of the exercises with the help of the physiotherapist, we are going to include in our heart failure clinic also as a rehabilitation purpose.
Thank you.
If you have more questions.
We can quantify, according in my knowledge, I am a sports physician. We can quantify what is the percentage of 1 RM, that is one repeated maximum. In that, a 1%, how much one can lift maximum for that person, like that, it should be below 1 RM, like that. I have read in exercise physiology or sports medicine books. It's nice to share knowledge. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Manish. Nitesh, if there are any more
Sir,
questions,
yeah, sir, there is no question. So on the behalf of Eternal Hospital, I would like to express our gratitude to all participants for your patient listening. And I would like to extend a special thanks to, of course, Ajit Bana sir, Dr. Jitendra Singh Makkad sir, Dr. Ashish, Dr. Sandeep, Dr. Sanjeev Sharma sir, Dr. Ravinder Rao sir, Dr. Atul Kasliwal, Dr. Sanjeev Sedana sir, Dr. Prem Ratan, Dr. Hemant Chaturvedi, Dr. Prashant Trivedi, and Dr. Kushwagat. And a special thanks, of course, to our chairperson, Dr. M.N. Thareja sir, and Dr. Sudhir Bhandari, and Dr. M.K. Podar. So now I will request Dr. Bana sir for his closing remarks, or if Dr. Bana sir is not available, then I will request Dr. Makkad sir for your closing remarks.
Yeah, Dr. Bana is left for the surgery. So I would like to conclude by thanking once again to our senior mentors and very respectable senior colleagues from IMA, Dr. Thareja, Dr. Podar, and other office bearers who have been here to encourage us, and their support is always there with us. And Eternal Hospital is indebted by their support in terms of the academic support. Wherever we needed good CMEs, they always came forward, and also for referring patients to us, having their tremendous trust and faith in our team, in our system, in our processes and protocols. And we are looking forward to many more programs with IMA, and we wish IMA the very best, because as in the beginning, Dr. Thareja said that where is the unity, the strength is there only. So we have to unite, we have to strengthen ourselves as a medical fraternity, and IMA has a pivotal role in that. So I wish that we can strengthen our IMA further with this very dynamic office bearers at the present IMA office. Thank you so much to all of you who joined us in the evening and spent good 1.5 hours with us. We thank you from core of our heart. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Last but not the least, special announcement, of course. So at the same time, tomorrow, 3:30, we'll be coming back with more topics. So tomorrow we will be discussing about advancement of orthopedics, biologics in rheumatology, a series of rare hernias, a case report, and cosmetic breast surgery. So see you tomorrow at 3:30. Thank you very much. Have a nice time. Stay safe. Thank you.